In this lecture, we will talk about the first phase of TC3, care under fire. The disclaimer, still the same. What we will talk about, what we will talk here. Just I will describe the role of firepower, power supremacy in the prevention of combat trauma, how to identify actions appropriate in caring for casualties in the care under fire phase, about demonstrating techniques. You will come to my department and I will demonstrate techniques, of course. Here you will watch video. I will explain the rationale for early use of limb tourniquet to control life-threatening extremity bleeding during CUF. We will talk about how to recognize life-threatening bleeding in the tactical combat setting. I will explain why immobilization of the cervical spine is not a critical need in a combat casualties with penetrating trauma to neck. And of course, I will describe why spinal immobilization is not a critical need in combatant casualties with only penetrating trauma. So, what to do in this phase, in this first phase of TC3? First of all, you need to return fire and take cover. When you saw a casualty or maybe someone of your teammates was shot at, you need to fall down, fall on the ground and return the fire. Why? Because in this way you will show your enemy that you are still alive and you can continue some fight. When you fall on the ground, you need to look for some cover. The next step, direct or expect casualty to remain engaged as a combatant if appropriate. You can't go to your casualty. You need to find cover, and then what you can do with your casualty, you can yell to him, yes, what to do. In this phase, all you can do, this is, first of all, this is communication with your casualty, with your group leader and with the other teammates. Communication. So you yell to your casualty what has happened, and if he can help by his own. Next step, direct casualty to move to cover and apply self-aid if able. Fourth, try to keep the casualty from sustaining additional wounds. Casualties should be extracted from burning vehicles or buildings and moved to relative safety. Do what is necessary to stop the burning process. Stop life-threatening external hemorrhage if tactically feasible. Direct casualty to control hemorrhage by self-aid if able. Use a committee TC3 recommended limb tourniquet for hemorrhage that is anatomically amenable to tourniquet use, and apply the limb tourniquet over the uniform clearly proximal to the bleeding site. If the site of the life-threatening bleeding is not readily apparent, place the tourniquet high and tight. This means as proximal as possible on the injured limb and move the casualty to cover. If your casualty doesn't answer on your questions, yes, you asked what has happened, if he can help his Owen, yes, to himself, and if he, the third question, да, yeah, third question, like if he can continue the fire. If a casualty in this phase didn't answer on any questions, didn't answer no answer, this means that in this phase your casualty dead, and you need to continue the battle. After, when you will finish this mission, you can come to a casualty and check what has happened. Why so? Here, you and your casualty and other group, you are all under effective fire. And about epidemiology of different wounds, if a casualty didn't answer, it means that maybe 99, maybe 90% that he got some wounds that causes death. Area management is generally best deferred until the tactical field care phase. In KUF, only tourniquet on the limbs. That's all. In the hospital, the casualty is the mission, but in TC3, you have the casualty and the mission. Let's examine a scenario from this book by A.D.M. McRaven. The scenarios in this book are all special operations, but the principles discussed apply to all combatant units. This is one of the most famous hostage situation in history. So a little background of this situation. Operation Thunderbolt was a counter-terrorist hostage rescue mission carried out by the Special Forces of the Israel Defense Forces and Entebbe Airport in Uganda on 4th of July 1976. A week earlier, on 27th of June, an Air France plane with 248 passengers was hijacked by Palestinian and German terrorists and flown to Entebbe near Kampala, the capital of Uganda. Shortly after landing, all non-Israeli passengers except one French citizen were released. The IDF acted on the intelligence provided by the Israeli intelligence agency Mossad. In the wake of the hijacking by members of the militant organizations, revolutionary cells, and the Popular Front of the Liberation of Palestine, along with the hijackers' threats to kill the hostages if their prisoner release demands were not met, the rescue operation was planned. These plans included preparation for armed resistance from Ugandan military troops. The operation took place at night, as Israeli transport planes carried 100 commandos over 2,500 miles to Uganda for the rescue operation. The operation, which took a week of planning, lasted 90 minutes, and 102 hostages were rescued. 5 Israeli commandos were wounded, and one, the commander, Lieutenant Col Yonatan Netanyahu, was killed. All the hijackers, 3 hostages and 45 Ugandan soldiers were killed, and 30 Soviet-built MiG-17s and MiG-21s of Uganda's Air Force were destroyed. A 4th hostage was killed by Ugandan army officers at a nearby hospital. The rescue, named Operation Thunderbolt, is sometimes referred to retroactively as Operation Jonathan, in memory of the unit's leader, Yonatan Netanyahu. He was the older brother of Benjamin Netanyahu, who served as the 2-time Prime Minister of Israel from 1996 to 1999 and from 209 till present. The operation is widely considered one of the greatest and daring special forces operation in history. Considering the high-risk nature of the commanderate, distance from home territory, and casualty and hostage rescue ratio. The tactics used were ingenious: deception, surprise, and violence. Here's what the layout looked like. Black arrows show the entry paths of the Israeli commandos. Just imagine, you are the combat medic on this operation. What would you do now? No medical care was rendered at this point. Israeli commandos had to establish control of the tactical situation first. Lieutenant Netanyahu died from his wounds. The assault phase of the operation took 90 seconds. Did the 90-second treatment delay affect his chances of survival? Probably not. Would a 90-second delay in continuing the assault phase of the operation have made a difference? Absolutely. Look what even a momentary delay can mean to a hostage rescue operation or other tactical engagement. A little description of background. The Maalot massacre was a terrorist attack which included a 2-day hostage taking of 115 people, which ended in the deaths of over 25 hostages. It began when 3 armed Palestinian terrorists of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine entered Israel from Lebanon. Soon afterwards, they attacked a van, killing 2 Israeli Arab women, and entered an apartment building in the town of Maalot, where they killed a couple and their 4-year-old son. From there, they headed for the Netiv Meir Elementary School, where they took more than 115 people, including 105 children, hostage on 15th of May 1974 in Maalot. The hostage takers soon issued demands for the release of 23 Palestinian militants from Israeli prisons, or else they would kill the students. On the second day of the standoff, a unit of the Golani Brigade stormed the building. During the takeover, the hostage takers killed the children with grenades and automatic weapons. Ultimately, 25 hostages, including 22 children, were killed and 68 more were injured. And you can see the question. I have never even heard of the raid of Entebbe. Why do we need to learn about military history? And here is the answer. There are only 2 times that you can plan for what to do in a tactical casualty situation before it happens. It's better to be prepared ahead of time, and we do that by studying lessons we have learned in the past. Not every casualty scenario is a hostage rescue, but these basic principles apply. It is imperative to get your casualty off the X and behind cover if you can. Sustaining a minor wound in a firefight does not mean that you should disengage from the fight. The best medicine on the battlefield is fire superiority. Moving casualties in KUF. If a casualty is able to move to cover, he should do so to avoid exposing others to enemy fire. If casualty is unable to move and unresponsive, the casualty is likely beyond help, and moving him while under fire may not be worth the risk. If a casualty is responsive but can't move, a rescue plan should be devised if tactically feasible. The next sequence of slides shows the hazards of moving casualties before hostile fire is suppressed. All unit members should be trained to move themselves to the point of first cover if able. And of course, don't put 2 people at risk if it can be avoided. Here is a dramatic example of casualty movement during KUF. Sergeant Wells had sustained a fatal gunshot through his leg, which severed his femoral artery. From the moment he was hit, he was unable to conduct self-aid and did not respond to calls from his fellow Marines. Gunnery Sergeant Shane attempts to pull a fatally wounded Sergeant Wells to cover. This third man on the left is Hospital Corpsman Joel Lambert, the platoon's corpsman. Gunner Sergeant Shane on the left is hit by enemy fire. Lambert was struck in the heel just after Shane was injured. He provided life-saving care to Shane, directed his evacuation, and dressed his own injury. He stayed with the platoon and continued his duties during the operation. In this rescue attempt, the fate of the first casualty was unchanged, and 2 additional casualties were sustained because effective enemy fire was not suppressed. Don't forget covering fire. If possible, let the casualty know that what you plan. Consider directing available vehicles to move into a position to provide cover. In studies from the Vietnam conflict of these casualties with penetrating neck trauma, only 1.4% would have benefited from C-spine stabilization. C-spine stabilization takes about 5-6 minutes, even for experienced medical providers. This is too much time to spend in care under fire on an intervention that is not proven to be necessary. Do not provide C-spine stabilization if the danger of hostile fire constitutes a greater threat in the judgment of the medic. Now we will talk about types of carries for KUF. You can see 4 types. First, 1-person drug with or without a line, 2-person drug with or without a line, SEAL Team 3 carry, and HAVES carry. 1-person drag. Advantages: no equipment required and only one rescuer exposed to fire. Disadvantages: relatively slow and not optimal body position for dragging the casualty. 2-person drag. Advantage: gets casualty to cover faster than with 1-person drag. Disadvantage of 2-person drag is exposes 2 riskers to hostile fire instead of 1. Let's go next. 2-person drag using lines. Advantages: can shoot while dragging, faster than dragging without lines, and faster movement of the casualty to cover. Disadvantage: exposes 2 riskers to hostile fire instead of 1. SEAL Team 3 carry, also called the shoulder belt carry. Advantages: may be useful in situations where drags do not work well and less painful for casualty than dragging. Disadvantages: what disadvantages? Exposes to riskers to hostile fire, may be slower than dragging, and may be difficult in kit and with an unconscious casualty. How to do this type of carry. The casualty arms are wrapped around the shoulders of both rescuers. The casualty holds onto the rescuers if he's able to. The rescuers will have to hold the casualty's arms around their necks if the casualty can't. Both rescuers grab the casualty's web belt in back, and after commando lift and go. HAVES carry, also called the modified fireman's carry or pack strap carry. Technique. What technique? The rescuer squats. The casualty's arms are wrapped around the rescuer's neck, and the rescuer holds one arm locked down under the other. The rescuer lifts with his legs. Advantages: only one rescuer is exposed to hostile fire, may be useful in situations where a drag is not a good option, and works much better than the fireman's carry. Disadvantages: hard to accomplish with rescuers or casualties kit in place, difficult when the rescuer is small and the casualty is large, often slower than dragging, and high profile for both riskers and casualty. This is a good example of how not to carry your casualty. If flammable liquids like petroleum products cause a fire on the casualty's clothing that you can't put out, then you will have to cut the burning garments off. If you can only do one thing for the casualty, stop him from bleeding to death. Do not treat minor bleeding during CUF. How we will know? Is it life-threatening bleeding or this is minor bleeding? So, when is bleeding life-threatening? First, there is pulsing or steady bleeding from the wound. Blood is pooling on the ground. The overlying clothes are soaked with blood. Bandages or makeshift bandages used to cover the wound are ineffective and steadily becoming soaked with blood. And of course, if there is a traumatic amputation of an arm or leg, this is 100% their life-threatening bleeding. And what here? There was prior bleeding, and the patient is now in shock. It means your casualty unconscious, confused, pale. How long does it take to bleed to death from a complete femoral artery and vein disruption? The answer: casualties with such an injury can bleed to death in as little as 3 minutes. What here? This is femoral artery bleeding in a pig. It does not take long to die from this. The need for immediate access to a tourniquet in such situations makes it clear that all personnel on combat missions should have a COTICIS recommended limb tourniquet readily available at a standard location on their battle gear and be trained in its use. Don't bury your tourniquet at the bottom of your backpack. Casualties should be able to easily and quickly reach their own tourniquets. If you have severe extremity bleeding in CUF, forget about direct pressure dressings or anything else. Go directly to a tourniquet. In CUF, we use only tourniquet. What here? The medic in this casualties unit was killed in the battle in which this casualty was wounded. Others in the unit attempt to control the bleeding from this soldier's wound just below his left knee. These improvised tourniquets were ineffective and the soldier bled to death. So don't let this happen to your bodies, to your casualties. Limb tourniquet application. Apply without delay if indicated. Both the casualty and the medic are in grave danger while a tourniquet is being applied in this phase. The decision regarding the relative risk of further injury versus and that of bleeding to death must be made by the person rendering care. Non-life-threatening bleeding should be ignored in this phase till the tactical field care phase. Apply the tourniquet without removing the uniform. Make sure it is clearly proximal to the bleeding site. If you are not sure exactly where the major bleeding site is on the extremity, apply the tourniquet high and tight on the arm or leg. Okay, let's watch video hemorrhage control.
If you can only do one thing for the casualty, stop him from bleeding to death. Early control of severe hemorrhage is critical. Injury to a major vessel can quickly lead to shock and death. Only life-threatening bleeding warrants intervention during care under fire. Life-threatening bleeding can be identified by several characteristics. There is pulsatile or steady bleeding from the wound. Blood is pooling on the ground. The overlying clothes are soaked with blood. Bandages or makeshift bandages used to cover the wound are ineffective and steadily becoming soaked with blood. There is a traumatic amputation of an arm or leg. There was prior bleeding and the patient is now in shock, unconscious, confused, or pale. How long does it take to bleed to death from a complete femoral artery and vein disruption? Casualties with such an injury can bleed to death in as little as 3 minutes. This is a femoral artery bleeding. It does not take long to die from this. All personnel should have a COT-C recommended tourniquet readily available and be trained in its use. Casualties should be able to easily and quickly reach their own tourniquets. Do not bury your tourniquet at the bottom of your pack. Where a tourniquet can be applied, it is the first choice of control of life-threatening hemorrhage in care under fire. Forget about direct pressure, pressure dressings, and anything else. If you have severe extremity bleeding in the care under fire phase, go directly to a tourniquet. The medic in this unit was killed in the battle in which the soldier was wounded. Others in the unit attempted to control the bleeding from this soldier's wound just below his left knee. The improvised tourniquets were ineffective and the soldier bled to death. Don't let this happen to your buddies. Apply a tourniquet without delay if indicated. The casualty and the medic are in grave danger when a tourniquet is being applied. The risk of further injury versus that of bleeding to death must be made by the person rendering care. Apply the tourniquet without removing the uniform. Make sure it is clearly proximal to the bleeding site. If you are uncertain about exactly where the major bleeding site is, such as in night operations or multiple wounds, apply the tourniquet high and tight, as proximal as possible on the arm or leg. Tighten the tourniquet until bleeding is controlled. If the first tourniquet fails to control the bleeding, apply a second tourniquet just above the first. Don't put a tourniquet directly over the knee or elbow. Don't put a tourniquet directly over a holster or a cargo pocket that contains bulky items. Unscrupulous manufacturers make and sell knockoffs that look very much like COT-C approved limb tourniquets. They have poor quality and numerous failures have been reported. There are many common mistakes made by first responders applying tourniquets. Not using one when you should or waiting too long to put it on. Not pulling all the slack out before tightening. Using a tourniquet for minimal bleeding. Putting it on too proximally if the bleeding site is clearly visible. Not taking it off when indicated during tactical field care. Taking it off when the casualty is in shock or has only a short transport time to the hospital. Not making it tight enough. The tourniquet should both stop the bleeding and eliminate the distal pulse. Not using a second tourniquet if needed. Periodically loosening the tourniquet to allow blood flow to the injured extremity. These lessons learned have been written in blood. Only use a tourniquet for severe bleeding. These wounds do not need a tourniquet. Neither wound is life-threatening. Bleeding is minimal. A tourniquet should not be used on these 2 wounds or other wounds like them where the bleeding is not severe. It is expected that tourniquet application will cause some pain, but it will also save your casualty's life. Tourniquets hurt when applied effectively. It does not necessarily indicate a mistake in application. It does not mean you should take it off. Manage pain per TC3 guidelines. After any tourniquet application, monitor the casualty closely to ensure that the tourniquet remains tight and that bleeding remains controlled. Reassess, reassess, reassess.
The video shows bandages and pressure dressings being applied or placed during cough. Tourniquets are the only TC3 recommended hemostatic intervention in the cough phase of care. What next? Here you can see types of tourniquets. TC3 recommended 3 types of tourniquets, limp tourniquets: CAT, SOF-T, and EMT. Here's a video how to apply tourniquets, body application.
Hey, it's Kurt. We're going to talk about the Combat Application Tourniquet, or CAT. Important thing to remember is this should be always accessible on your kit, not buried in a pocket or somewhere not accessible when you need it. First thing you want to do is take the tourniquet, wrap it around the patient's extremity as high as possible. Take the strap, tighten it as tight as possible so 3 fingers cannot fit under the strap itself. Secure the strap using the Velcro. Take the tightening rod, twist until bleeding has stopped. Secure the rod into the securing clip. Check the pulse to make sure you have cut off the blood. Secure the strap through the securing clips and place the safety strap across the rod. Remember to annotate the time of application. Hey guys, we're going to talk over the Combat Application Tourniquet, or CAT tourniquet, buddy application routed. First thing you want to do is take the tourniquet, route it underneath the leg, making sure to get it as high as possible on the injured extremity. Route it through the friction adapter. Tighten as much as possible. Secure the Velcro to the Velcro strap. Use the tightening rod to tighten down on the tourniquet until the bleeding has stopped. Secure the tightening rod in the securing clips. Check pulse to make sure bleeding has been controlled. Once confirmed, use the safety strap to secure the tightening rod. And don't forget to mark time. We're going to talk about the Combat Application Tourniquet, or CAT. Important thing to remember is this should always be accessible because your life or your buddies could depend on it. First thing you want to do is obviously route your own extremity through the tourniquet. Put the tourniquet as high as possible. Tighten using the tightening strap so 3 fingers can't fit underneath the strap easily. Take the tightening rod, tighten until bleeding stops. Secure the tightening rod in the securing clip. Check your pulse to make sure you've occluded the blood flow. Finish routing the strap through the securing clips. And secure using the safety strap. And don't forget to mark time of application. We're going to talk about the Combat Application Tourniquet, or CAT tourniquet, self-application routed. First thing you want to do is open up the tourniquet, route it underneath the injured extremity, put it as high as possible on the extremity, and tighten as much as possible. Secure the strap to the Velcro. Use the tightening rod to tighten until bleeding stops. Secure the tightening rod and the securing clips. Make sure bleeding has stopped, and secure with the safety strap. Do not forget to mark time on the tourniquet.
And now will be video about how to apply soft T tourniquet.
Hey guys, we're going to cover the Special Operations Forces Tactical Tourniquet Wide looped application. First thing you want to do, bring the tourniquet around the injured extremity as high as possible. Tighten the tightening strap down as tight as possible. Take the tightening rod, twist until bleeding has stopped. Secure in the triangle link. And check the pulse to make sure you've occluded blood flow. Once confirmed, mark time. Hey guys, we're going to talk about the Special Operations Forces Tactical Tourniquet Wide Buddy Application Routed. First thing you want to do is route the tourniquet underneath the injured extremity. Secure the strap back onto itself using the link. Tighten as much as possible. Use the tightening rod to twist the tourniquet tight until bleeding has stopped. Secure it using the triangle link. Check to make sure all bleeding has been controlled. And don't forget to mark time. Hey, Kurt here. We're going to talk about the Special Operations Forces Tactical Tourniquet Wide, or Soft T, self-application looped. First thing you want to do is open the tourniquet, put the injured extremity through, tighten down the strap as tight and as high as possible on the injured limb. Take the tightening rod, twist, and secure using the triangle link. Check pulse to make sure you've occluded blood flow. Remember to mark time on the tourniquet. We're going to talk about the Special Operations Forces Tactical Tourniquet Wide, or Soft T, self-application routed. First thing you want to do is open up the tourniquet, place it under the injured extremity, route it up as high as possible on the leg, secure the clip, tighten as much as possible. I can't stress that enough. Tighten the strap down as much as possible before you start tightening using the tightening rod. Take the tightening rod, twist until bleeding has stopped. Secure in the triangle link. Check to make sure there's no continued bleeding. And annotate time on the tourniquet of application.
Tourniquet use notes. Checking a distal pulse and marking time of application are not recommended during COOF. Simply tighten the tourniquet until the bleeding stops. Add a second tourniquet if necessary to control bleeding. Tourniquets should be applied at the high and tight location only when the bleeding site cannot be clearly identified. Otherwise, they should be placed 2-3 inches above the bleeding site. There are most common mistakes. First, not using one when you should, or waiting too long to put it on. Not pulling all the slack out before tightening. Using a tourniquet for minimal bleeding. Not making it tight enough. The tourniquet should stop the bleeding. Not using a second tourniquet if needed. Periodically loosening the tourniquet to allow blood flow to the injured extremity. Putting it onto proximally if the bleeding site is clearly visible. Not taking it off when indicated during TFC. Taking it off when the casualty is in shock or has only a short transport time to the hospital. So, here's a summary of key points in CUF. Return fire and take cover. Direct or expect the casualty to remain engaged as a combatant if appropriate. Direct the casualty to move to cover if able. Try to keep the casualty from sustaining additional wounds. Get casualties out of burning vehicles or buildings. Stop life-threatening external hemorrhage if tactically feasible. Use a TC3 recommended limb tourniquet for hemorrhage that is anatomically amenable to its application. Direct the casualty to control hemorrhage by self-aid if able. Airway management is generally best deferred until the TFC phase.